Members, this is the meeting of the Subcommittee on Waterworks Amendment Regulation 2017. This is the appointed time, and we have a quorum. So we're going to meet with the administration and deputations. I think the deputations have more or less arrived, so let's begin. I'd like to remind deputations that if necessary you can put on the earpiece and choose the channels if necessary. Channel 0 is floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, and Channel 3 is Putonghua. For deputations and individuals, each of you will be given a speaking time limit of 5 minutes. And may I also remind deputations and individuals that your speeches and submissions are not protected under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And I would like to remind you to take note of the various security measures in the matters to note for members of the public attending electoral meeting in the complex or sitting in the gallery. The notice has been attached to the letters sent to you by the Secretariat, and the notice is also available on a table, and if necessary you can also seek a copy of the notice from the security staff in Electoral. If you have prepared speaking notes, please put down your name on the notes, and when you leave the conference room you can give the speaking notes to the staff for members' reference. So I will invite deputations to speak according to the seating plan, and then I will invite the administration to respond. First, Ms. Ng Si-lok from Progressive Lawyers Group. She hasn't arrived. All right. So next deputation, Mr. Ma Yuk-ying, Chairman of the Hong Kong Institution of Plumbing and Drainage Limited. 5 minutes, please. You may begin. First of all, I did not prepare a submission because I've been busy in relation to the WSD's amendment on the pipes and fitting requirements. I think that this is good, and it is a bit late because the trade has been commenting on pipes and fittings, and there have been new products which should have been included in the schedule. Because of the lead in water incident, the administration has expedited its work on amending the regulation.
Part 1.
In relation to Part 1, pipes and fittings, Item 11. In relation to materials for flushing water, the standard is comprehensive, but I think that one thing is missing. Because, well, we at the moment use a gray polyethyl pipes, and that is a standard 2674-2. This is of good quality, and the trade is confident about it, and it has also been approved, but it is not included. I wonder why, because when it comes to our design work and when we make submission to the WSD, we are told that it's not specified in the standard and it will not be approved. And this will cause extra time of the trade in completing its work. So please consider including that as well, because it is of good quality and 80% of the trade is already using it. Thank you. Next, Mr. Hong Chi Kwong, representative of the Hong Kong Plumbing and Sanitary Ware Trade Association Limited. Thank you. Our association supports amendment to Chapter 102A. We have prepared a submission. I suppose you have read it. And one comment is on Section 10, Item 1.2. In relation to the static pressure of draw-off taps and stop valve, we have consulted the trade, that is the tap supplier and the dealers, and their response is that the working pressure of the stop valve should be 16 bars. As for the stop valve, the working pressure according to the manufacturer is just 10 bars. But according to Section 2, Part 2 of Section 10, if the working pressure should be 16 bars, perhaps it may not be feasible from the manufacturer's point of view. I wonder if this can be amended. Next, Dr. Wong Siu-wing, Chairman of the Chartered Institute of the Plumbing and Heating Engineering Hong Kong Branch. Thank you. Our institute supports the amendment when it comes to the regulations, as there are continuous developments and there are high expectations on the quality of water. We support the amendment. Well, we'd like to have further information on a number of provisions. For example, these questions have been asked before. For 19A, Item 6, for 19A and which will be added, I think that this 19A contradicts with some previous provisions. I think you should clarify this point to avoid misunderstanding. And also for Part 1.6, I think that you should clarify this bend or curve, and also whether it affects the service life of the bend or the curve. Point number 3, for subsection 20 or section 20. Well, I think that the department has been keeping an open mind. Apart from updating the standards, you also refer to other standards. For example, for item 20, you have considered stainless steel pipes and you can use AS3688 for stainless steel fittings. But still, we think that this is not clear enough. For stainless steel pipes, it must be of grade 304 or better, whereas for AS3688 2.3.5, there is a definition for stainless steel pipes. If it is in contact with water, you must use 316. Otherwise, you can use 304. So I hope that the department would also take note of this. Another point. Although this may not be covered in this regulation, we must bear in mind that it exists in different fittings, such as filters, the valves. Again, these should be kept up with the times, and the standards should be updated or revised. Thank you. Fifth deputation, alumni of plumbing technicians, Mr. Wong Ping Fai. Thank you. In relation to the Waterworks Amendment Regulation, our organization supports it. New standards are incorporated, which can effectively reflect the application of materials and technologies so that we can improve the quality, and consumers can also have more choices. But I have a number of comments. Now, in relation to the commencement notice, this regulation will come into effect on the 14th of July 2017. And once the amendment is passed, we have code of practices, codes of practice, for example, on the building standards, etc. How can we fit those in existing building works? Please clarify this point for the trade. And also for Section 10, amending Schedule 2, pipes and fittings, point number 6, bend or curves. It should not exceed the internal diameter or to diminish the or the waterway or alter the internal diameter of the pipe. I understand that this is different from the existing regulation. I'd like to know the rationale. And also Part 4, hot water inside services. Point number 2, with the written permission of the Water Authority, a water heater may be connected direct to a main if and then so on and so forth.
And point number 3, if a water heater is connected direct to a main, every draw off point of the water heater must not be less than 15 mm above the lowest part of the top edge of the receptacle supply from the water heater. So I would like to ask the administration, in making amendment to this provision, what is your thinking? How do you come up with the calculation of 15 mm, or how should that be calculated? And lastly, our association will fully cooperate with the WSD in implementing this amendment regulation. Will work for the overall good of the society. Next, we have Mr. Wong Wing Wah from the Registered Minor Works Contractor Signatory Association. Thank you, Chairman. In this amendment regulation, our association supports it. But then for the provisions, well, they have to be practicable first. Now, I'd like to mention 2 points here. First is about applying for acceptance letters from the WSD. After the acceptance letters have been granted, the WSD will still make a prosecution if problem is found, and there is no time limit, and this is so unfair to the plumbers. So, for example, the IRD requires that a company should keep records for 7 years, and these have to do with, say, accounting records and important documents. But then if the government doesn't put a time limit on prosecution for plumbing works, in other words, all the receipts, material records, minutes of meetings, all these have to be kept for an indefinite time. So can the government, say, put a limitation on the timing, and that is after the residential flats have received the acceptance letters, and we can just do a water test once, and then the report can be made available to the government as reference for whether there is a need for further action. And also, the contractors and the plumbers are also buying components as registered by the WSD. So we are just acting as an intermediary. Can the plumbing components manufacturers guarantee that all their components are fit and that they can be used as drinking water pipes? Is it the case that there will never be a problem? Please consider whether it is fair to shift all the blame to the plumbers. Second, in this amendment regulation exercise, can the WSD incorporate a performance pledge, which makes the process more transparent, so that the law-abiding contractors and plumbers would know exactly the progress of our application for water meters. Now, we have to apply for water meters and go through a certain procedure, but there is no pledge on the part of the government on the timing of approval. So is that fair to the stakeholders? Next, we have Mr. Yong Chen-pan, the Association of Registered Fire Service Installation Contractors. Thank you, Chairman. Our association has written to the subcommittee on the 5th of June on this Waterworks Amendment Regulation 2017. The association agrees in principle the amendment of the regulation because the regulation commenced in 1975, and the last time it was amended was 2002. Now, Parts 1 and 2, Part 6 include pipes and fittings, valves and fittings, tanks, and water heaters, and flushing apparatus, etc. All these 6 parts have to do with potable water and also flushing water. But then in the definition of plumbing works, there are 2 parts: fire services system and also inside services. And in the building now, there are 2 systems, and we have to get acceptance letters for both a fire system, inside system, and also the flushing system. And I understand that the regulation was amended in response to the COI report 2 years ago, and because of the problems in drinking water, the WSD has to further clarify the water standards. Now, for the fire service installation contractors, we think that the WSD can take hold of this opportunity to add in a Part 7 about fire services system installation. Apart from the pipes and fittings, valves and taps that I mentioned, we must have regard to the fire services system installation, firefighting system, for example, hydrants, hose reel systems, and even the sprinkler systems and the street fire hydrant systems. All these installations have to be approved by the FSD, and the WSD has also to approve some of the parts as well. But then there are no prescribed standards for the materials. So for our association, we believe that the WSD can, in this amendment exercise, add in a part for fire services system. And that should be covering the fire services system installation immediate after brick tank. That should be added as a Part 7, so that the WSD can, in the future, come up with standards so that our sector can be exactly clear on what to do. Now, as to how that can be drawn up, I think you can talk to the sector. So this is the view of our association. Next, we have Mr. Lee Wai-kwok from the Association of the Construction Materials Lab. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Chairman. Since mid-2015, for safeguarding public health, the lab sector has been providing tests for water supply materials and also safety tests for drinking water. So if we can have legislation to regulate on these aspects, then we can come up with more appropriate tests, and we can better safeguard the safety and quality of water. Thank you. The ninth one is Mr. Tan Kwang Ye, Hong Kong Licensed Plumbing Professionals Association, the chairman of this association. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I'm from the Hong Kong Licensed Plumbing Professionals Association. I'm the chairman. In this amendment regulation, I agree that the WSD should move ahead with the times and make certain amendments. In relation to materials, in terms of certain materials, well, to our understanding, the licensed plumbers understand that we have to get approval for all types of materials before we can commence works. Then this is not very convenient for us, so please consider this. And also for stainless steel pipes, as what Mr. Wong said, we hope that the regulation can set out clearly the materials for the stainless steel pipes and also the parts, and what are the standards. For licensed plumbers, the department has set a number of standard or requirements, and I think it's necessary that you should move ahead with times. But because of manpower shortage on the part of the administration, the WSD is asking us to apply in writing, and they are not aware that they are short-handed. And so for alterations or for new buildings, all the works have experienced delays as a result. So for a 15 mm water meter, while the approval process takes, say, half a year to 1 year, so how can you, do justice to the public if you work like that? So that's all I want to say today. Thank you. So all the deputations and individuals have spoken. I now hand over the floor to the Deputy Secretary of Development Bureau, Mr. Mag, to give an overall response. Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to thank the deputations and individuals for giving us your views. So I'll make a consolidated reply. So many deputations have made suggestions on our standards and specifications. So let me try to explain our rationale for moving these amendments. Right now, the WSD is now actually uploading the latest standards on pipes and fittings on our website. And the information on the website is inconsistent with that in Schedule 2 in the regulations. So through this amendment exercise, we would like to appropriately incorporate the standards now on the website into the Schedule 2 of the Water Amendment Regulation Cap 102A. So, in other words, the materials that you are using would not be different, say, from those set out in Schedule 2. So, in other words, you will not be breaching the regulations in your work. So that's the main purpose of the exercise. But then some deputations have mentioned about using Japanese standards for flushing water systems, and also they have certain views on stainless steel pipes, etc. And the WSD does have a technical committee comprising members who are from the trade, and through this technical committee, they will continuously look at whether there are new standards and specifications of materials which should apply to Hong Kong or used in Hong Kong. So the technical committee will make recommendations to the Auto Authority, and then amendments will be made. So we've heard a number of your suggestions, so we will relay the same to the technical committee for their consideration. And if we found that the materials that you suggest can be used in Hong Kong, so in the next amendment regulation exercise, we will incorporate those as well. So that's our first response. Second, a deputation mentioned about the commencement date on the 14th of July and what will happen, or what is the arrangement after that. Now, let me say that there is a transitional arrangement for this amendment. In other words, before the amendment comes into operation, I mean, the pre-existing pipes are fine. Now, but for projects approved by the Water Authority after the commencement date, then they have to follow the latest standards. But as I said, actually, many of you are following the new standards now. But it's just that these standards are set out in the WSD's website, and they are not stipulated in the law. So there shouldn't be any problem with transition. And the third point, some deputations have raised suggestions on the Waterworks Amendment Bill. But today we are talking about the Waterworks Amendment Regulation, but not the bill.
So I hope that you will not mix up the amendment of the regulation and the ordinance itself. Anyway, we take note of your views and will consider your views. And some deputations mentioned the manpower of the WSD, and whether in the process of approving applications it is necessary to make a provision in the Waterworks Amendment Bill. When the Council received deputations in relation to the Waterworks Amendment Bill, I also heard the same views, and the WSD has a performance pledge which states that the applications would be processed in 30 days. Of course, this is subject to some conditions. For example, some further information may need to be furnished, which may cause the applications processing to go beyond 30 days. We'll go back and consider if we can make improvements. So that concludes my response. Thank you, Mr. Mack. And then I'll open the floor for members to ask questions or to make comments. I should impose a speaking time limit because Dr. Low did not specify a time limit last time, and it was an endless discussion. So each member, 5 minutes, please. Dr. Helena Wong. First of all, I thank the deputations for coming here and expressing your views on this regulation, especially in relation to the regulation. The amendments are technical. I have a number of questions that I'd like you to clarify. First, Mr. Wong Wing-Wah, I'd like to invite you to respond to this. Just now you mentioned that the government should not just regulate workers, but also the safety of plumbing materials. So I'd like you to elaborate on this point. In safeguarding the the quality and safety of water, drinking water. And on regulating materials, do you have any comments on this? On regulating plumbing materials, I think that if the supplier has not specified that this is for potable water, and then if something goes wrong with the drinking water, should the plumber be solely responsible? I think we have a long supply chain, and each participant should do their job instead of just holding the plumber accountable. It is totally unreasonable that there is no time limit of to the prosecution for regulating workers. Well, I think that it is reasonable. I agree with you that plumbing materials should also be regulated because the workers are only responsible for installing the materials, but not producing them. We have been urging the administration to regulate in relation to the responsibilities of suppliers and contractors. Mr. Tang Kwong Yu, just now I heard that when you apply for certificates on whether the materials comply with the standards, you mentioned the lack of manpower in the department causing a delay. Can you elaborate on this point? This is true because after the incident happened, the lead and water incident happened, the department has been closely monitoring the trade's work, and there are more stringent requirements on plumbers, and it is also true that licensed plumbers face prosecution. For example, for the temporary water supply for flushing water, there are lots of obstacles, and if to apply for a permit to flush the pipes, well, we may face a fine, or our license may be suspended or revoked. We have discussed these issues with the department, and there is an impact on the trade. Well, simply put, it is a fact that it takes so much time to apply just for a water meter. And Mr. Mack, we're just talking about the time for processing the application. It doesn't mean that the application will definitely be approved. After approving the application, we still need to complete the works. We need to install the water meter. It's not as simple as what Mr. Mack suggests, that the water meter can be installed very easily. I just want to explain the workflow. Well, the government's pledge is 30 days, but in your experience, after making an application, how much time does it take to get an approval? Generally, for the trade, at least 3 months. 3 months? Well, Mr. Mack, is it really the case that after submitting the application, it will be processed in 30 days or 3 months? Because there is a big difference. Can you tell us whether the WSD is short of manpower, and how much time exactly can you process an application? As I responded to your questions just now, I also mentioned that very often, although we have a performance pledge of 30 days, because of the information contained in the application form and because of a departure from the application process, some further information may need to be submitted. So it's true that in some cases it takes 3 months. Well, what is the percentage of these cases? We do not have the figures at hand because today the amendment relates to the standards stipulated in the Waterworks regulation. Well, I don't think you can say that this is irrelevant, because if we have so many stringent standards, and yet the application process is so slow that things got stuck at the lab or with the WSD, I need to know your statistics. How many applications did you receive last year, and on average, how much time was needed to process the applications? Because if it took too long, it may have to do with lack of resources or staff deployment. And if you're short of resources, you should come back to the Finance Committee for more resources. Otherwise, the standards won't work if there is a huge backlog. Well, please give us supplementary information then. Next, Peter Show. Well, my understanding is that the deputations in general agree with the amendment regulation. But I'd like to pick up a point that Mr. Tang referred to. According to you, you're required to submit a lot of documents and go back and forth with the department. Why is it that in the past such documents needed not be submitted? Just now, according to the administration, the performance pledge is one of 30 days, but you said that it takes at least 3 months. So what about things in the past? How much time was needed? What is the percentage of cases that required 3 months? Thank you, Mr. Shu. When we applied for a water meter in the past, it took 3 to 6 months. Now, will the department suggest that the application can be processed in 30 days? This is about receiving an application and then sending out a letter saying that your application has been received. It doesn't mean that the water meter application can be approved in just 30 days. I can tell you for sure. Now, what is the percentage of cases that we've come across? According to the trade, after the lead in water incident, the department has been experiencing serious delays in processing applications. I understand that it takes at least 6 to 12 months now. I don't understand why the department gave such an answer, because for the trade, written permission must be sought from the department to carry out works in various aspects. Otherwise, we face prosecution and we may face suspension of license for 1 to 6 months. So the application has to be done in writing. In the past, also in writing. Well, in the past, also in writing, but then the process was much simpler, and there weren't so many requirements and not many details, because now in the application we're required to stipulate the method of soldering joints or connecting joints, pipes, and also for the solders, for inside service. Now, approval from the department is required before we can carry out this task. Is it really easy to do this? Because is it fair to ask us to go through the tests, etc.? Well, just now you mentioned connection of pipes in the past. Is it the case that there was no need to specify that in the application? Right. So, but that's the cause of the lead in water incident, because there was no specification relating to the joints. Right, but of course, if it's wrong, we should admit it. But there are different quality of practitioners in the trade. We don't know whether some workers would be unscrupulous. Well, but if it's the responsibility of a licensed plumber on the use of sodas, is it the licensed plumber's responsibility to specify that in the application? Yes, it is the department's requirement now. But what about things in the past? There was no such requirement in the past. But now the department now requires you to specify the soldering materials. Well, then could it be the case that workers in the past did not have the knowledge and they might have used the wrong materials, and that is why you're now required to stipulate the materials used? So you're now tasked to monitor the workers. I still am not clear about a point. In the past, it would take 6 months to a year. So what is the total time needed for approving an application? Well, if the task is simpler, then it would take much quicker, but at least from submission of application to completing the application, I'd say at least 6 months to 9 months. That's more or less the time frame. Well, just now you mentioned half a year to 1 year, but now you're suggesting 6 months to 9 months. So that means it's quicker now. Well, let me clarify. In the past, 6 months to 9 months were required to process the application, but now 6 to 12 months because of a number of reasons. For example, connecting to the water mains might be an issue, and you might need to apply for an excavation permit. But then we also need to make a lot of applications in writing. Right, I understand the part about applying in writing and that the procedure is more complex. And then if you use soldering materials, you need to specify the materials. And I understand the rationale because the incident arose from the use of soldering materials. But if that's a process that you take, then how would the works be affected? You say that in the past it takes 6 to 12 months, but what about now? The delay at least 3 months.
So now it's 9 months to 1 year and 3 months, right? So there will be an extra 3 months, right? Okay, thank you, Mr. Xu. Dr. Edward Yu. Thank you, Chairman. Some deputations have referred to the fact that they may apply for certain exemptions and that they would like to adopt materials that are not specified in the law. And in the Regulation 20, you have particularly added in 20(2) and also a B. And that sets out more clearly under what circumstances would the WSD or the Water Authority will authorize plumbers to use materials outside those specified in the law. And there is also the mentioning of water quality, which was not there in the past. And also in the definition, in the definition part, I don't see any definition of water quality here. So we are seeing this new term, but then this new term is not defined in the regulation. So how are you going to deal with this? And so how do you judge whether it's a departure from a prescribed specification for a pipe or fitting? Thank you. Mr. Mack. Thank you very much for your question. We don't define water quality here, so in that case, we would use the a dictionary definition. So in other words, if, say, the water authority considers whether an exemption is to be granted, he will consider that the materials applied for, whether they are different from the prescribed materials, before he decides on whether the materials should be permitted to be used. We didn't have such an arrangement in the past, but this time round, because we see that different plumbing materials may carry different risks. So if we have to consider materials which is a departure from the prescribed specification, we have to take on board the factor of water quality as well. So in the long term, would you be defining what you mean by good water quality? We are considering that. As we said, we hope to come up with a set of standards. But as to how such standards should be drawn up in the law, we don't have a position yet on that. What I'm worried is that in the future, then they may try to apply for exemptions, but now you have a new means not to approve such applications because you said that you have this water quality consideration. But then they said that no, there is no adverse impact. But then you said that there is this factor of water quality here. So that means that the exemptions that were used to be granted in the past will not be granted in the future. Will there be an uncertainty here, and as a result, you will not be approving many exemption applications in the future? No, that would not be the case. As I said, while the materials approved by the WSD have been listed in the website, and the amendment exercise is just to put the information on the website into the regulation itself. And some deputations have just suggested adopting the Japanese standards, say, for the flushing water system. But then that has nothing to do with drinking water. We don't have to consider the water quality on that aspect. But then if there's been suggestion that we should use 316 instead of 304 for stainless steel pipes. Now, if that is to be considered, we have to actually be mindful of the quality of the water because we're talking about drinking water. As I said, we have the technical committee which is considering all these standards and see whether they can be applied or used in Hong Kong. And if the answer is in the affirmative, then that can be used. And after the technical committee has considered this, then it will be put into the specified standards. So it's all a matter of the procedures of work process. I have a question myself. Some deputations have just mentioned about the arrangements after the commencement of the regulation. I see this issue here. Now, after the regulation commences operation, for pre-existing pipes, they will be following the old standards. But then if there is repair work, say, for example, if there is this pipe which has a leaking problem, maybe reinstallation has to be done. And will it be because of this reinstallation of this pipe, the entire system has to be renewed or replaced? In Section 14.3 of the Waterworks Ordinance, there are two circumstances under which the prescribed standards have to be followed. First is the construction. The second is installation. So for construction and installation, they have to be following the prescribed specifications. Say, in the case of a repair work, there is no need to follow the standards. But then maybe the entire stretch of the pipe has to be reinstalled or replaced. Mr. Yu has, or Dr. Yu has raised this before. What do you mean by construction? If you're talking about a total renovation of the entire building, renewal, refurbishment of the entire building, we'll consider that as construction works. But if you are talking about a unit in a building, it is undergoing renovation and water pipes are being renewed, we would consider these as works of minor nature. Say if in the unit there is this pipe which has a water leakage problem, do you consider that as construction? No, that is considered as repair works. Mr. Yong mentioned about fire services installations, and he's suggesting that an additional part be added. Mr. Mack, what's your response to that? As what Mr. Yong said, the fire services system are governed by certain fire services regulations. Now, in our regulation, we don't have any requirement on that part. We've heard Mr. Yong's views, and I've just given an overall response. And as the next phase of our work, we will consider whether we would add in the part proposed by Mr. Yong. We will communicate with Mr. Yong's association to see whether such equipment should be added. But in the long term, our principle is that whenever amendment is made, we don't want to do it through a piece of subsidiary legislation. We want to amend the principal ordinance to empower the water authority to issue some practice notes so that in the future, amendment is to be made through the water authority issuing practice notes. So we don't have to go through the legislative amendments exercise. In fact, we are already working on that. After the ordinance has been amended and the water authority has that authority, then future changes are made easier. But we don't rule out the possibility that after this current exercise, if needed, we will come back to the Legislative Council to make further to propose further amendments. Actually, we can consider Mr. Yong's proposals later on. The second round. Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to put the question to Mr. Lee Wai Kwok, Association of Construction Materials Laboratory. We are dealing with standards of many plumbing components here. And whether these components meet with the standards, tests have to be conducted, and your work is very important. Just now we were talking about delays and also the long process in obtaining the acceptance letters from the administration. That may be a problem on the part of the administration. That may also be have to do with the whole collapse whether there are sufficient hawker labs in Hong Kong to do tests for such materials, and these include, say, physics and chemical tests and so on, and also biological tests and so on. We want to adopt stringent standards because we have been very lax in the past. Maybe our standards are lagging behind. Maybe it has to do with the problem in the execution or implementation process, and as a result, drinking water has been contaminated. So the lead and water incident happened, and people may suffer from intoxication, and 11 children are having developmental delays because of the problem in drinking water. But the sector may find that this is a great problem, but we don't want people, the 7 million people in Hong Kong, suffering from, say, problems in their neural system because of a problem in drinking water. I want to make sure that as far as the implementation level is concerned, we are fine. Mr. Lee, you are from the sector. Can you tell us how many accredited labs are there in Hong Kong which can conduct the 3 types of tests that I mentioned concerning water quality? Well, we have to conduct several types of tests. The materials for the pipes. Second, after the water meter has been approved, chemical tests have to be conducted on drinking water to check on the 4 types of heavy metal and their concentration. I understand about the water quality, but what about the materials? How many accredited laboratories are there in Hong Kong which can conduct physical, chemical, and biological tests that I mentioned? Not many labs can do biological tests. Whether there has been a delay, well, over 10 labs can conduct tests on plumbing materials, over 10. Then can they issue certificates to say that these materials comply with the government standards? They can conduct various tests.
There are different tests for different materials. I know that means for some labs they may be able to do pathological tests, but they're not Hawkless labs, and they cannot conduct chemical tests, so on and so forth. Let's say if the lab is not accredited in other areas, then how can you issue that certificate? Are you going to subcontract the testing work to another lab? The suppliers can find a suitable lab for the test. For example, for stainless steel, we have labs for stainless steel. If it's PVC pipes, there are also other labs that conducts tests for PVC pipes. Does it mean that there are three different labs will have to be engaged for 3 different tests before submitting the application to the government? No. For UPVC pipe, there is a lab that can test all kinds. For microbiological tests, those labs may not be able to do those tests, and the suppliers will get a lab that can conduct all sorts of tests. How many labs are there? There are 2. There are 2 labs that can conduct all tests. Let's say if there are only 2 labs for conducting all 3 kinds of tests for all construction projects in Hong Kong, then definitely there will be a huge backlog. What can we do about it, Mr. Mack? What can I supplement? Because for microbiological tests, you can send these samples to UK and overseas for tests on non-metal materials, and this is the existing practice. So if we cannot cope with the workload, we'll send them overseas. On microbiological tests, we have never had a backlog in Hong Kong. Usually the delay is caused by late submission by the suppliers. Perhaps the Deputy Secretary can explain to us your understanding in terms of resources available to labs, whether the resources can allow smooth implementation of the regulations without compromising our standards. About a year or so ago, when the WSD revised and upgraded the standards when they were first introduced, the trade encountered some difficulties in meeting our requirements. Like some deputations mentioned, it took longer to approve the applications. The WSD also maintained close liaison with the labs. As we understand, there are different labs to test different plumbing materials, and there should be more than 2. Just now the gentleman said that 2 labs could do all the tests, but in fact there are 10, close to 10 labs that can conduct tests for all plumbing materials. What about those materials that cannot be tested? Like Mr. Lee said, they'll be sent to other countries for non-metal materials. I understand that that should be tests relating to 6920, and the WSD will be setting up a lab for testing plumbing materials. We are going to allocate resources in this regard. Then will you take up business from the outside? Let's say if they refer plumbing materials to you for the government lab to conduct the test, and does it work? Now, our test seeks to ensure that the materials are in compliance with the standards. Apart from relying on the certificates of labs in the private sector, we also have internal control. So Dr. Wong asked how we can make sure that the plumbing materials are up to our standard. The WSD, in this regard, will increase manpower and set up a lab to test the materials to ensure that the plumbing materials are truly in compliance with our standards. And this will be an additional step in the procedure, and we will be working closely with the labs. And when we introduce new standards, as you have heard just now, deputations may have views on the new standards, and we do keep in close liaison with the labs to see if they are capable of conducting tests using the latest standards. And only when they have agreed would we introduce the new standards. Mr. Peter Shiu. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Tang's question. He just now mentioned the practice in the past. Well, in the past, regarding soldering materials, did you require the materials to be specified in the form? You mean before the lead in water incident? No, we didn't. Right, so now you do require them to specify the materials. That may be the case, but according to them, it is undesirable as there is a delay of at least 3 months. We agree that after the lead in water incident, the WSD has strengthened the vetting procedure not only relating to soldering materials, but other approval processes. So it now takes longer for the trade to get letters of acceptance from us. Dr. Wong just now asked for some statistics. We'll go back and provide this information later. I understand that there is an impact on the trade, and as I mentioned just now, we'll be working closely with the trade and discuss with the trade whether we can adopt some streamlined processes to improve the situation. Chairman, every time when we introduce more stringent standards, there is a price to pay. The question is, who pays it? To safeguard public health, you put in place a more stringent application vetting procedure. I think in the existing circumstances, Hong Kong people won't say no. But I don't think it is fair to transfer the cost onto the trade, because they also need to be accountable to the person paying them. Now, there are also other problems. For example, of course, you need to have more manpower. If you receive more submissions, you must increase manpower. It's that simple. The department has a performance pledge, but the performance pledge should not be vague. You should specify a time frame, because we want to make sure that the amendment will make Hong Kong better, not worse. If now the procedure gets longer and longer and things get stuck with the department, then you need to do something about it. Well, and we also have the Hong Kong Plumbing and Sanitary Ware Association. We have CB bracket 1151/1617 bracket 03, and that's their submission, which relates to stop valves. And this is a written submission relating to the pressure in KPA. They believe that some standards are more, well, let me respond to that. I think there is a different understanding of the word use. We're talking about the testing pressure when referring to 1600 kPa. Their submission refers to 10 bar or 1000 kPa, which is the working pressure, which is different from the testing pressure. We take note of the view, and we may consider cancelling this requirement. Because there are subsequent provisions stipulating this requirement, and there is no need to repeat this requirement, and we will consider amending this to avoid misunderstanding. Any response from you? Thank you. Well, I am quite puzzled by Mr. Mack's remarks. In the amendment, it says be capable of resisting a pressure of at least 1600 kPa. I think this should be referring to the working pressure, not the testing pressure. And that's why we agree that we actually wanted to refer to testing pressure. We therefore agree that we should amend it. So, Mr. Hong, do you agree that it should be amended? Right, it can be amended, but then this is not testing pressure, this is working pressure. I'm going to delete the whole phrase. All right, will do, thank you. Any other deputations who have questions? Mr. Shiu, well, why don't you wait for Dr. Edward Yu to finish first? Thank you, Chairman. Well, I asked the administration about applying with the director for an exemption for non-compliance. I want to ask the deputations, in terms of applying for exemption can you share your experience with us, especially when there is an additional power? Well, if in the opinion of the Water Authority this will adversely affect the quality of the water, then your application may be rejected. Do you have any views on that? I represent the fire services contractors. Well, of course, for fire service, the installation is not for potable water use, but in the fire service installations, some fittings or some couplings of pipes may be related, and application will be necessary for use every time. And if exemption is to be granted per application, then let's say for Part 7, if this can be used for non-potable water, I hope that this can be regularized, because the focus is on drinking water. For other non-potable uses, flushing water, fire service, etc., if we can comply with the regulation, I hope that the process can be streamlined, because as mentioned just now, they have a huge backlog, and we understand we need to strengthen control on the installation for drinking water, which is the public's expectation. On the other hand, we hope that the procedure for can be streamlined for non-potable water. I hope that the department can consider regularizing the application procedures. Well, in the past, what happened in the past, well, application would be granted on a case-by-case basis, and I hope that for exemption we can take another approach. Well, I already responded to that. Basically, at the next stage, we will consider this amendment. Legal advisor, on Dr. Edward Yu's question, if you go to clause by clause, for section 25, subsection 2, the new section, it says that the Water Authority can give exemption to non-compliant plumbing materials, and that's when you come to the clause by clause stage 25. Well, if you delete the words except unless otherwise specified in clause 25, if you delete this part, and then this will be inconsistent. But well, wait till we come to that stage.
Deputations, do you have anything to add, Mr. Wong? I'm from the Chartered Institute of Plumbing. Well, there are now some stainless steel water tanks. Are there any standards, prescribed standards for such water tanks? Mr. Mack, anything, any supplement? We don't have such standards yet. Mr. Wong, any further question? No standard, in other words. So, if we want to work on such water tanks, are we going to ask an AP to do something about it? Stainless steel water tanks. They are now being used in the sector, but they are not just like concrete or fiberglass water tanks. They are not that commonly used. So far, we haven't been able to identify international standards for such water tanks. And as what the sector says, we will deal with such works on a case-by-case basis. If a landlord wants to use certain materials, the owner of the project would certainly be the authorized persons. And also the licensed plumbers can give advice to the AP, and then the application can be lodged with the WSD for special approval. Mr. Wong Ping Fai? We need to get special approval for certain items, for example, the water tanks. And also the water heaters. And when these are included in our application, they will make a special approval for these items. And all along, the system has worked well, including the approval process for the stainless steel water tanks. Mr. Peter Xu and Dr. Helena Wong asked about the application process. Let me tell you the difference between what was done in the past and the present practice. I have been applying for water meter all the time before the lead in water incident. It takes normally 2 to 3 months to get the approval for the water meter. The licensed plumbers, have come up with clear drawings and there is no amendment needed, so we can get the approval for the water meter in 2 months, and sometimes you can get the approval even within 10 days before the lead in water incident. We accept that kind of time frame, but then for the restaurants, they are still unhappy about the time period because the business environment in Hong Kong is very tough. So we need the approval process for that type of establishment to be faster. But after the lead in water incident, that's how the process works. When we submit the drawings or the plans to the WSD for approval, then we will commence works, and then we submit Part 4 to apply for acceptance. And then if there is no problem found after the inspector has inspected, and then we will try to collect the water samples, and then we will try to get approval for the water meter. And then we will ask the relevant officer to actually install the water meter on site, and different departments are involved. And we have to work together with the water testing company, and they said that they would be submitting the water sampling test report to the department within 5 days. And after that, we will ask the officer, we'll notify the officer that the water sampling test report has been submitted to the department. And then the department will issue an order to the relevant officer to start the water meter. And then the licensed plumber will get to work on the water meter, and the water meter will be installed by the officer. That takes longer because we need to do the water test, and also in approving the plans. Now we have to give all the details of the materials in the plans, the works technique, and also the soldering methodology, the coupling method, and so on. We didn't have to do that in the past. So because of these additional processes, it takes longer to approve the plans because everybody is doing things more cautiously. And I believe that it will be a long-term arrangement. In other words, the process now will be implemented in the future for a long time. Now, this is going to be a regular practice for the future, so I hope that the administration, if they found that they don't have sufficient resources, ask for more resources from the lawmakers to help expedite the application process. Well, so you pay for what you get, as what Mr. Peter Xu always says. If we apply for a water meter now, during the application process, let's say that the cost is one in the past was 1 in the past, now it's 4 to 5. So we are talking about, say, applying for a water meter in the rural areas or for residential unit. Maybe we used it to share a big water meter with my neighbors. Now I may apply for an independent water meter myself. So members of the public have to pay more because of the lengthened or protracted application process. So the resources and the time committed by the LP will be more. So they may have to pass on the costs to the consumers. So I would like just to outline the work process for members' reference. Mr. Wong Wing-Wah, supplement from you? Yes, I would like to say this. In terms of applying for water meters, well, some peers may get the application approved very quickly, but not for myself. I think the government should say, give an undertaking, say they will do it in 2 to 3 months' time. If there is no performance pledge, then this is no good at all. You can actually postpone or defer your approval on and on. All of us are familiar, I know about this. I'm a member of the technical committee myself. I've asked about the approval time for the installation of water meter, but the department does not answer us. They just say 30 days. Well, I don't think it's a problem if we are asked to provide more information, say what is the material used for the soldering and so on. We've seen this problem and we have to address the problem. So if you don't put the details down, how can you make sure that the plumbers will monitor their workers properly? But then if there is no performance pledge, then we will be seeing all sorts of problems. And the workers may have to, take the responsibility. So the administration has promised to consider your view. So maybe we can talk about this later on. Dr. Helena Wong, you have a further question? Yes. Thank you, Chairman. We talk about testing. I would like to ask about the process of the supply chain. When you apply for the acceptance letters for plumbing, you have to fill in the form, the details of the materials, including the brand names, the name of the manufacturer, the producer, the addresses, the origin, the model, etc., and also the test reports approved by the administration or the department. Now, after all this is done, I would like to ask the government, how can you vet or ensure that the materials they purchased and are delivered to be installed on site are exactly those approved by you previously? Why did I ask this? Because in the lead and water incident in the 11 affected estates, the WSD has demolished the pummeling systems in Kaiching and Kuai-Lun estates, and they found that these materials did not match the approved materials. They are not of the same brand, they're not from the country of origin, and they have been installed. And the administration was not aware of that. So let's assume that the labs have done their jobs properly and they've met with all the, say, the different tests. But the question is, the materials installed are not those submitted on paper. So in the supply chain, say in the delivery of the materials and the installation process, for the entire process, how can you ensure that there will not be any stakeholder who is breaching the Waterworks Amendment, Waterworks Ordinance, or even the Trade Description Ordinance, because what they're installing do not match what they claim they will install? So would you be requiring them to say, to furnish reports from the customs and to make sure, say, these batch of products actually come from Germany as claimed and they are properly delivered to the works site? Would you have a mechanism to ask them to provide customs report stating the supplier, and also would there be the specific certificate of origins from the manufacturers and so on? to make sure that there will not be a swapping of materials in the process. So, Vice Chairman, your question is about monitoring work, and that may not be very relevant to the amendment regulation. Well, of course, it has everything to do with the amendment. If you dispute my input, then I question your suitability for serving as the chairman. I've finished with my question. Can you ask the administration to respond? Well, unless you are suggesting that we should add in such provisions, why would you not allow the officers to respond? It would be difficult to for them to answer questions. Are you speaking on behalf of the administration or what? Deputy Secretary, the objective of amending the regulations is really to supervise this, to uphold, safeguard the safety of the drinking water. Please step down if you don't understand this point. Well, the WSD has a inspection mechanism. There are two scenarios. There is one interim inspection before the works are finished. There will be interim inspection. When will that happen? Well, if there is cover-up, then the of the materials, and our staff will inspect materials. The WSD staff will go out and check on the materials. In the past, we didn't actually check on the components for the materials used. But after the lead and water incident, the WSD has done two things. Number one, we have communicated with the stakeholders, including the developers, and I've asked them to put in the contract terms to the effect that they should have random sampling on the materials on whether they are on the par, and we have communicated with the developers, and these should be done on a voluntary basis.
就會抽一啲物料去驗。水務署咧，正如我頭先咁講咧。
As I said just now, the WSD is planning to set up a lab with internal resources, and then we will take an extra step to randomly test materials. But of course, it's done on a random basis because of manpower constraints. We hope that by taking this extra step, we can impose deterrence so that the trade will not use non-compliant materials or do something not in compliance, so that we can make sure that the materials are up to standard. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on a point. For the principal legislation and the regulation, they seek to regulate inside service and fire service. As for government projects, you do not have any regulation or control. Is that true? Yes. Well, this regulation also applies to government projects. So for government projects, you also need to comply with those standards. Then when the government conducts a project which involves water mains, is there any requirement to find an IIB, independent inspection body, to inspect on a random, to take samples from the supplier of plumbing materials for random inspection. Well, there is no such requirement in the law, and we have not required that IIB be engaged for government projects for inspection. What about Waterworks? Does the government use IIB? Now, I'm not talking about inside service, but rather procurement of large plumbing materials, say for public works projects, laying of water mains or under carriageway, for example. Then there will be a requirement in the contract for the contractor to engage an independent body when procuring these materials. Can you explain what is meant by water mains underneath the roads? Now, we're talking about inside service today, but what I just referred to isn't part of the inside service. Let's say for Dongjiang water, when it arrives in Hong Kong and after it's treated in the water in the treatment plant, then the water will be transported to the pumping station all the way to the water mains, to the connecting points. And for all these parts before reaching the inside service, is IIB engaged? For the government's part, before reaching the connection point, we include this as a contractual requirement, not a legal requirement, that the contractor should engage a third party to check the materials procured. So you will ask a third party to check with the supplier to make sure that the materials are those you ordered. What about inside service? There is no such requirement to engage a third party to inspect the materials at the manufacturer's plant to ensure that the procurement and the samples sent to the lab are the same. No such requirement at the moment. So there will be two systems, won't it? Because for water mains, you do the gatekeeping job, but for inside service, there is no such requirement.
I
think we need to strike a balance in terms of imposing costs on society and meeting requirements for inside service. But yes, you should know that when it comes to ensuring safety of drinking water around the world, the concept and the rationale is to regulate every part from the source of water to the tap. When you adopt another standard in a certain area, and there is no engagement of a third party to make sure that the plumbing materials are genuine, then there will be a disconnect in your regulatory framework. Like I already explained, for government projects, we include this as a contractual requirement, not as a legal requirement. When a contractor is engaged in a development project, the contractor is required to meet the standard, and that is to say the plumbing materials must comply with the standards specified. As to how this is to be done, we have not stipulated this in the law. We allow flexibility. Some owners may act on a voluntary basis and may do as you suggest. The point is, it is not a mandatory requirement in the law, but I want to emphasize that to ensure the safety of drinking water, we also have a test on the quality of drinking water before we issue the certificate of completion. And I think I'd like to explain to Dr. Wong that when it comes to the quality of water coming out from the tap. When we conduct the final check, we will obtain a water sample which must meet the latest WHO standard. Right, I understand there'll be a final check on the quality of water once works are completed. I know, but we're talking about the standards of plumbing materials. I'm just saying that for government projects, you need to be more stringent in your gatekeeping. You cannot just arbitrarily change your standard, because you know when somebody replaces the plumbing materials without your knowledge, then it may affect the quality of drinking water. And I am targeting the supplier and importer of plumbing materials. There is no regulation, and you need to rectify that. You're adopting two standards. Of course, when it comes to minor works, if you want, say, replacing pipes in my kitchen, it is impossible to engage a third party, an independent body. But what about plumbing material suppliers? How many are they? I think the Customs and Excise can keep a close eye on them. You can just target those handful of importers or suppliers. I think it is possible to require them to engage in IIB. There are only several suppliers in Hong Kong. You should target the source. Well, Dr. Wong allow Mr. Shiu to ask questions as well. Please ask them to respond first about regulating material suppliers. As we responded earlier, for our way forward, we're going to consider regulation on different stakeholders, such as suppliers, importers, developers, contractors, which will be our next stage of work when we further amend the Waterworks Ordinance. That is, we'll see whether they should be regulated in the next amendment exercise. Mr. Peter Shiu, Chairman, I need to declare that I am a supplier of construction materials, but I don't supply the materials that we're discussing, pipes, etc. And at this meeting, we're discussing standards. And I thank deputations for expressing their views. Just now, our discussion turned to the supply of materials, how we could impose some more stringent control. I think last meeting we already covered this point, but I'd like to stress once again that for the lead in water incident, it wasn't to do with the materials, but the use of wrong materials, that is the use of wrong solders, leaded solders in connecting pipes. It had nothing to do with the plumbing materials themselves. Even for solders, they themselves were all right as long as you don't use leaded solders. The fault lies with the workers who use the wrong materials at those joints. So I just want to clarify this point for the benefit of the public. Second point, as to how we can enhance safety of materials. I agree that this is a good move, but we need to strike a balance at the same time, or at the end of the day, the public foots the bill. For water pipes, well, usually it's copper pipes or UPVC pipes. For drinking water, you use copper, but otherwise other materials will do. For this paper, we have BS standards, British standards, and the European Union standards. I think all the standards are set out clearly. We have 8, 10. We have a handful of suppliers of pipes in Hong Kong, and I think that they definitely will be following international standards. And apart from suppliers, you also have contractors, and you also have the architect's firm as a consultant. And definitely, again, they all of them will be following the same standards. As for taps, as I mentioned last time, apart from direct supply from the mains, you also use water tanks, and then there would also be water stored along the pipes. And as some members suggest, some lead might have been leaked into the pipes. But once you turn on the tap themselves are not a place for storing water. It's where water goes through. So what really affects water quality is the water tank and the pipes. That's for a building. Whereas for water taps, let's imagine it's just where water goes through. Is it really safety hazard? I think the department understands. And we basically keep a close eye on these matters as a construction material supplier. Of course, to safeguard public health is important. But when you talk about different stakeholders in the construction industry and the documentation involved, you must take note of the cost, because at the end of the day, costs will be transferred to consumers. Well, say for the department, let's say you can imagine if you require more applications in writing, you need more manpower to process the applications, and more manpower means extra costs. You should also bear this in mind. Dr. Wong, every time Mr. Peter Shield mentions this point, I need to clarify. I need to correct him that the lead in water incident is caused by a number of factors. Using leaded solder to connect pipes leading to leakage of lead into water is one factor, but it doesn't mean that even non-compliant plumbing materials would not cause the water to be contaminated. For Kaicheng, Kuailun estates, etc., the water supplies department cut trunks of pipes for testing, and it was found that the plumbing materials were totally different from those approved in terms of the country of origin, model, and ingredient, etc. So if we only considered leaded solder as the main or the only cause of the lead in water incident, then we're not learning this hard lesson. We cannot step up regulation on the plumbing materials to safeguard the safety of drinking water, and that is the purpose of this amendment regulation, to update the already outdated BS standards.
So if we just say that all we need to do is to ask the workers not to use leaded sodas in the future, then the problem will go away, then that's definitely wrong. Mr. Peter Shield. First, I have to I respect Dr. Helena Wong, because she was the one exposing the incident, the lead and water incident. But I must respond to what she said. Now, we found that there was lead, and Dr. Wong said that there was this estate and that materials were found to be those not approved before. I don't know why the architect's firm has allowed that to happen, and I don't know why the government has not monitored properly. Now, as to what Dr. Helena Wong said, administration, you should know about the materials being replaced in certain estates. Is this at the cause for the lead in water incident? Yes, I don't have anything to add. Why did I say so? Well, let's look at the facts. We discussed this last time. For the lead in water incident, it's because of the lead in soldering materials. Dr. Wong referred to this estate where some pipe components were demolished and they were found to be those of a different brand approved before. That's a fact. But is that a cause for the lead and water incident? Let's not try to mix up the facts. Dr. Wong, your turn, please. Dr. Wong, if Mr. Peter Shiu is very interested in the two sets of piping systems being replaced, and then you would have to read the report, because the brands were different and the standards were sort of very different from those approved. And actually that the part was marked in red in the report itself. Well, today we're not discussing this issue, because every time Mr. Peter Shiu mentioned this, I believe that he wants to protect the sector. I understand where he is coming from, but then if you just say that it's merely a problem with the soldering materials, then we don't need this regulation at all. Well, let's again ask whether the deputations have anything more to add. If not, then I would like to thank the 8 deputations coming here. You've given us a lot of suggestions, and I hope that the administration can make a written response to deputations' views for members' reference. So thank you very much, deputations. You may now leave the meeting room. Thank you. I would like to discuss with members here for this amendment regulation. On the 12th of July, well, the scrutiny period will come to an end. And before the 12th of July, we must finish our scrutiny of the regulation. But going by the progress now, we might have difficulties in meeting that deadline. So can we discuss a bit about the progress of our scrutiny, legal advisor? On the 30th of June, we have to make a report to the House Committee. We just have one more meeting. It's already 10:15. Can I ask the administration, DS, do we have time to have the clause-by-clause scrutiny? Can we extend the meeting time for 15 minutes? Yes, all right, I'll extend the meeting for 15 minutes, and we'll make use of the time remaining to go clause by clause in scrutinizing the regulation. So we have to hand over the meeting room by 10:45. So let's continue with the scrutiny. Please return to your seats. Let's continue with our scrutiny of the regulation, because we have a tight schedule. Legal advisor has reminded me that well, let's wait till Dr. Wong comes back. Let's just adjourn the meeting for a while.
主席係咪今日冇時間即係再延？
Well, is it that we can't extend the meeting further? We will extend it till 10:45. No further extension beyond that. I'm just worried that we can't finish our work in the next meeting in 2 hours.